Good morning, and thank you for coming to our Lunch and Learn. Today is October 27th, and we have Erin Thomsen here from Safety Matters Training Institute, and she's going to be talking to us about fall protection. This is part one of a two-part series, which will conclude on 11/10. So if you haven't signed up for the second part, make sure that you do. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Everyone's on mute. You can type questions into the question box, and when Erin is done, we'll go through all the questions and answer them all to the best of our ability. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Erin. Hang on just one second. And there we go. You should be able to share your screen now, Erin. And I'm going to get out of your way.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully, yeah, excellent. You can all see parts of my screen. So welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this gorgeous Tuesday early morning. I was going to say afternoon, but it's morning. I thought I would start off today's session by just kind of briefly showing you guys the LNI Web Page. If you haven't been there recently, they've done some really cool updates. So they've kind of changed the look of it. That's one of the biggest things. And I wanted to show you and make sure that everybody knew how to find some of the safety rules. So if you just type in lni.wa.gov, that's the address for it, LN, the letter ni.wa.gov. It brings up this front page basically. What I've done from the front page is I've chosen the safety and health. So if you click on safety and health, it gives you several options here. What are you looking for? How do you want to find it? I chose let's find things by the chapter, rules by the chapter. You can also find things, if you go back up here, you can find safety rules, click on that. You can click by topic, you can click by chapter. I like to find things by chapter. So the chapter for the new unified fall protection is a 296. They all start out 296. But if you go to the chapters, we're going to do chapters only, and you scroll down all the way to the very, very bottom. Oh, actually, it doesn't go all the way to the bottom on this one. I thought it did. We're going to change it out. We're going to go to the 800s, which is towards the very end, which I know to be true. We're going to go towards 880, which is what the Unified Fall Protection Code is. Look at that. They keep going. Oi, oi, oi. So 880 is what we're looking for. It's going to be the very last page, of course, 880, because it's the latest and greatest, newest chapter that they've come up with. If my computer will play fairly with me, here we go. So 880, oh yeah. By the time you get down to 880, it's now called the Unified Fall Protection. And that's because they have unified it across all of the industries out there in Washington State. Click on the Unified Fall Protection, and this is everything we need to know. All right, you have a really cool quick reference guide. This one right here, if you click on this, it simply shows you all of the different scope, at what heights, what threshold height, what trigger height do you have to pay attention to things. So regardless of height, what do we have to do? And then here's the reference to the actual WAC code. At 4 feet, what do we have to protect at 4 feet? What do we have at 10 feet? This is construction only in 10 feet. What do we have to protect once we're above 10 feet? So they've got this really neat little basic threshold guide of what do we have to do, right? So definitions, this is what we're going to talk a bit about today. What are some of the changes to the definitions? Now you can either look at things in an PDF form, which I don't particularly care for. I like to look at things, if you go to the read at legal.wa.gov, it brings it up in this fashion. And from here, you can easily just kind of scroll through things and figure out what are they talking about. I like to see it in this manner. All right, so 296, 880 in the leg.wa.gov, the legal fashion of it, gives you this stuff. HTML is what I like to see it in. You have that quick reference guide in the HTML, which brings it up a little bit easier for us to look at quickly, scroll through it, find out what we're looking for. We can go back. We can take a quick look at some of the definitions. They've changed a few, and we're going to discuss those. One in particular was the working walking surface definition. So if I scroll, hopefully I'm not making you sick, but if you scroll all the way down here to the bottom, working walking surface, that was a big definition change that they put us through. All right, so there's your definitions. The application, the general requirements, what your fall protection is regardless of a height. Now they have a new training requirement, so they changed the training requirements just a little bit. So the 100s are all the general. Everybody's got to follow these things. Fall protection plan has to be implemented once you're working above 10 feet. The 200s are your 4-foot rule. What things are required to do at 4 feet. Your 300, construction. And then you get order pickers, which are your forklifts, your elevating work platforms, which are now going to be called MUPs, we think. Mobile elevated work platforms, MUPs. These are your aerial lifts. These are your scissor lifts, powered platforms. If you're a window cleaner sitting on a bosun's chair, the different types of scaffolds. So scaffolds are still going to be in here, even though scaffolds is an 874, 296874 WAC code. Cranes, so on and so forth. And then when you get into the 400s, this is how you protect. What are all of the methods out there, the guidelines that they've given us that they say, okay, when you're at this threshold height, this is how you have to protect. So these are all of the requirements for using things like covers, for using things like guardrails. What do you have to do if you have ramps? PFAS, your personal fall arrest, or a PFRS. Are you in restraint? There's a big difference between arrest and restraint. Self-rescue device, they've thrown this into here now as well. If somebody falls, can they self-rescue? Warning line systems, I'm sure you guys are probably pretty familiar with warning lines. The safety monitor, some of you are probably out there using a safety monitor system while you're on a low-pitched roof. There's even a safety watch system, which is a 1-to-1 ratio instead of a 1-to-8 ratio. Another big change that came along, not necessarily a big change, but one that OSHA was asking us to look at, was catch platforms. They didn't quite agree with our definition of a catch platform, and so they asked us to change that. If you keep scrolling down to the bottom, you get into the appendices. This is probably pretty important for you guys as roofers. Appendix A, how do you determine the roof widths? Now I started to look through this, and by gum, I am not a roofer. And when all of the math started to show up and all of the different schematics of how do you determine how wide your roof is, I went, yeah, I'm glad I'm not a roofer because I don't have to figure this stuff out. But that's Appendix A, how do you determine the actual width of your roof. Appendix B, this is something I talk about quite often when I'm doing my fall protection classes. A lot of people simply do not understand how to calculate their clearance. They don't take into account that it's going to take a little bit of space before their PFAS, their fall arrest system, actually comes into play and arrests their fall. So a lot of times people might be wearing a harness and a lifeline, but they're only 15 feet off the ground. They've got a 6-foot-long bungee lanyard on, and yet they've got 20 feet of their rope out. All of the slack is out. When they fall off the edge because they haven't calculated their clearance, unfortunately, they're probably just going to hit the ground below them or hit something below them, a lower level. Calculating clearance is important, as well as knowing your swing fall. The further I walk away from that roof anchor with a 50-foot lifeline and I've got all of the slack out, the further I'm going to be swinging back and forth. All right, so this is a really good web page. This is a great little area to look at the new unified WAC code. Brief little history. I think I may have explained OSHA has been after us since 2013 to make some changes. And so this is a culmination of years of discussion, years of drafting up proposals for different plans that LNI wanted to put out there. And they finally got OSHA to buy off on this stuff. And this is how we're going to end up with a new unified fall protection code. So let me get this out of the way. And if you have any questions about the LNI website, please bring that up in the chat room and we can discuss that when I'm done. So what I wanted to talk to you about today was some of the different changes. And all of these slides that I'm going to show you today, they're all going to be available to you. If you want to have access to them, not a problem. Let Tracy know, let myself know, and I'll make sure that these are rolled out to you guys today. You'll be able to have access to them. At least I'll give them to Tracy today, and then you guys should have access to them fairly quickly. So I do a lot of fall protection classes. One of the new things I've created in my PowerPoint has been this little slide right here. This is your Unified Fall Protection Code. I've stripped out a lot of the things in the 300 section that didn't necessarily pertain to the actual training. We don't need to talk about pits, forklifts. We don't need to talk about boom lifts or cranes or some of those. I don't need to be talking about ski facilities because we're in construction. If we need to talk about forklifts, we'll go to the forklift code and we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about whether or not, you're required to have fall protection. Same thing with boom and scissor lifts. So I've tried to condense it and keep it just fairly directed right towards construction. Again, the 296-880. If you're out there and you have fall protection plans, please make sure that you strip off the 296-155 and insert your 296-880s. Fall protection plans, all right, what's required at 10 feet, that's in the 100. So it'd be 296-880, 100.20 is now your fall protection code. If you have site-specific plans, you need to make sure that you're referencing these new code numbers, all right? Do not have your paperwork referencing the old 296-155, Part C-1 or Part K or any of the other parts. We need to start referencing the 296-880. And the other thing with LNI, they did not give us any leeway. So all of these new requirements went into effect October 1st. And unlike most code changes where they give us 6 months to get used to things, they have given us no grace period. So all of this went into effect October 1st. I'm not saying necessarily that you're going to be cited if they find your paperwork doesn't reference the new codes, as long as you're following the new requirements. But you do need to look at your paperwork. Ultimately, it's about 85% of citations from OSHA and LNI are not having our paperwork in order. So when you get a chance, try and start to reference these new codes. So let's jump into this, definitions. I told you last time we spoke, at least I believe I told you the last time we spoke, that there's not really a lot of new changes, and that's good. When they decided to unify the Fall Protection Code, they looked across all of the industries and they looked towards the industry that had the strictest codes already in place. And they felt that construction already had the strictest codes. So not too much has been done for construction, and that's a really good thing. It's the fixed industries, the general industries, which are now going to really have to change their methods of work and their scope of work to try and conform to these more strict fall protection rules. So we're down to 2 trigger heights, you guys. We have 0 and 4 feet basically are the 2 trigger heights. OSHA has trigger heights of 0 and 6 feet, and so we wanted to be at least as effective as they are. In fall protection and construction, we already had the 4-foot rule. If you were on a working walking surface above 4 feet, you had to protect. So we've gone to a 0 and 4-foot rule. That's pretty much it, guys, 2 trigger heights. There's a few little exceptions here and there. Construction has a few little exceptions. Ski lifts have a few exceptions as well. But basically, it's going to be 0 and 4. They've put in this new definition, feasibility. Feasibility comes up in scaffold work. Anytime I'm going to be erecting a scaffold, it's up to the competent person to determine whether or not it's feasible for his crew to be in fall protection. So what's feasible? It's determined as, is it possible to perform the work using a conventional fall protection system? What's conventional? Guardrails. safety nets, a PFAS, a personal fall arrest system, or that it is technologically possible to use any one of these systems to provide fall protection. When it's feasible to protect through conventional methods, you must protect. They've changed top plate, how we talk about top plate. Now, for your roofers, this may or may not really come into play because you're probably already on a solid surface where the framers have been walking the top plate, laying down that sheet of plywood for you guys to finally come around and roof, perhaps. Top plate, we all think about top plate. What's the top plate? It's when I'm walking that little 3.5-inch 2x4 if we're in a wood building and we've stood all of the walls up, and I'm now walking on the wall, the top plate of that wall, as I lay down the floor, as I perform leading edge work. So now top plate, basically the definition of what constitutes a top plate, they're going to call it a structural member. So if you're looking through the WAC codes and you see things like structural member, this is what they're talking about. It's a support that is a constituent part of a building or structure. So this is going to include your columns, your girders, your beams, your trusses, your joists, and any other similar supporting member of a building or a structure. Here you have this iron worker sitting on an I-beam. So what is he on? He's on a structural member. What is he doing? He's actually sitting on the top plate, right? So he's now on a structural member. They changed the definition. They added some language to what a fall protection plan is, right? So the old definition, it was plainly a document used to identify areas on the job where there was a 10-foot hazard. You needed a plan that described your method of fall protection that you were going to be using above 10 feet. It should probably include your procedures of how you're going to install your anchor points, how you're actually going to use it. Are you going to be in restraint or arrest? How often are you going to be inspecting it? And then how are you going to dismantle it? Once you're done with your job, how are you going to bring it down? Pretty basic. So they added some additional language. LNI needed to clean it up. OSHA wanted them to get a little bit more specific. It's a written planning document in which the employer identifies all areas on the job site where a fall hazard of 10 feet or more exists. What's the plan going to do? It's going to describe method or methods of fall protection that are going to be used to protect your employees. And then it's going to include the procedures governing the installation. So the words that I have in bold right there are new. These are some of the new language that they've added to this. It's going to protect employees. It's going to provide procedures governing the installation, the use, the inspection, and the removal of the fall protection method or methods. So off to your right-hand side, there's a brief little template of an LNI fall protection code. Now here's the funny thing. This LNI fall protection code is straight off of their website currently, and it's still referencing the 296.155.246 code. So we need to make sure that even LNI starts to get their act together, and they need to change the code in their fall protection plans. So if you have a fall protection plan that's still referencing the 296.155.246, don't feel too bad about it because LNI still is as well. But we need to change it to the 296.880, the 110. What else have they changed? This was a big controversy. They changed the dimensions of a hole and they changed the definition of it. This is one of the weirdest things I still do, when I train OSHA classes versus LNI classes for fall protection. Because OSHA always determined that a floor hole was 2 inches in its least dimension, and yet LNI decided to be really aggressive and say, no, a floor hole was an opening measuring less than 12, but more than 1 inch in its least dimension. Where did we find a floor hole? Well, we found it in the floor, the roof, the platform, or a surface, and then they defined it as a hole through which materials, this was the important thing, through which materials, but not persons, may fall, such as a belt hole, a pipe opening, or a slot opening. So technically, all of those holes out there on the job site that the plumbers and the sparkies are opening up at 1 inch up to like 5-inch core holes and things, per LNI's requirements, they were technically supposed to be protected. A floor hole was something that materials, but not a person, could fall through. We identified a floor opening as anything measuring 12 inches or more in its least dimension, through which a person may fall. So we had a floor hole and a floor opening. OSHA's like, this is a little bit confusing. We're not really quite sure what you guys are talking about. So what LNI decided to do, they replaced the above definitions. So these definitions, floor hole, floor opening, they no longer apply. What's out there? OSHA's definition, a hole. It's a gap or a void 2 inches or more in its least dimension. Where do you find it? In the floor, in the roof where you're working, or any other surface. So that means even out here on the pavement setting, when we have holes like this now, it doesn't matter. It's not saying that a person could fall through it or materials could fall through it. It doesn't identify it that way. It's just simply a gap or a void 2 inches or more in the floor, the roof, or any other surface. So something like this would need to be protected going forward. They changed the wall opening. And this one I couldn't even really wrap my head around because they really didn't change anything in it other than you can now not use the number 30 or the number 18. OSHA actually asked them to stop using the numbers and to spell it out. So what's an opening now? It used to be something that was 30 inches high, at least 18 inches wide. Where would you find it? In the wall or partition through which a person might fall, all right? Now an opening, this replaces the above definition, is simply a gap or a void, 30, T-H-I-R-T-Y. Sorry guys, this makes me chuckle. 30 inches or more, 18 inches or more wide in a wall in a partition through which an employee can fall to a lower level. So these little windows here, if this window sill doesn't meet the right height, if this is wider than 18 inches, bigger than 30 inches, this needs to be protected. At what heights? We're going to find out. Leading edge. Leading edge has always been a bit controversial. Lots of people think that a leading edge is just like maybe standing on a rooftop right by the ledge, and that's not leading edge. Leading edge is a verb. It's an activity. You have to be performing leading edge. It's not just standing somewhere static. So they changed the definition. LNI had to clarify some things. It used to be considered the advancing edge of a floor, a roof, or formwork, which changes locations as you're laying down additional form work, right? So basically, as I'm standing on those 2x4s and laying down the plywood or the sheet metal in front of me, I am performing leading edge. What did they do now? They clarified it. The advancing edge of a floor, a roof, formwork, which changes location as additional floor, roof, formwork sections are placed, formed, or constructed. And then they've added this. The leading edge is to be considered unprotected side or edge during periods when it is not actively or continuously under construction. So if it's a leading edge is an unprotected side or edge, that means when it's not being continuously let out, when we're not performing that activity, we need to protect it. This was one of the biggest changes that was talked about in 2017. When I sat in on a stakeholder meeting with LNI, they brought up working walking surface. And a working walking surface has always been defined as any area including, but not limited to, your floors, a roof surface, a bridge, the ground, any other surface whose dimensions are 45 inches or more in all directions. What do you do on a working walking surface? You can pass along it, you can conduct work on it. We always had this thing right here, a working walking surface does not include vehicles or rolling stock on which employees might be performing their task. So you see a lot of those flatbed trucks Flatbed trucks delivering materials to a job site, that's called rolling stock. And those flatbeds, you can't see me right now, unfortunately, but even if you could, I'm sitting down. But guys, I'm 5'2". I'm fairly small. Most of these flatbeds are right at my eye level. They're about 5 feet tall, and yet they meet the dimension of a working walking surface. They're wider than 45 in all dimensions. Why is nobody ever protected above the 4-foot rule? Because a surface, a working walking surface, does not include vehicles or rolling stock. Now, what they decided to do, strip out 45. What happens when you strip out the dimensions in a definition? You pretty much open it up to anything and everything that meets this definition now is considered a working walking surface. If you strip away the dimension, it opens up the entire field to certain things. They even looked at us in the stakeholder meeting and they threw it out there. They literally lobbed it out and they said, what can you do from the rungs of a ladder? And they let that kind of settle over the room while we all scratched our head and went, what are they insinuating? Well, they were insinuating that a ladder now, if we strip out the dimension, might be considered a working walking surface. So here's what the working walking surface is now. This is the new definition. Any surface, whether horizontal or vertical, on which an employee is going to be walking, working from, or uses to gain access to a work area or a workplace location. What does it include? But not limited to. This is going to include, but not limited to, your floors, the ground, roofs, ramps, bridges, runways, stairs, dockboards, formwork, reinforcing steel. Hey, but they threw us a bone, but not including ladders. And with those last 4 little words, the construction industry breathed a huge sigh of relief, but not including ladders. So 45 by 45 is gone. It's now anything that I can work on, walk across, pass along, stand on, do my job from. It doesn't matter how big or wide it is. If I can do any of those activities, it is considered a working walking surface, but not the ladders. Oh, thank goodness for those 4 little words. So the general requirements, everybody has to follow this. This is in the 100s now. Employers need to ensure that all surfaces on which employees will be working or walking are structurally sound and will support them safely prior to allowing employees to work or walk on them. They describe the inspection of your protection system. So this is mainly for your PFASs. The employer must inspect all components. So that's everything, you guys. That's your hardware, that's the lanyards, that's their harnesses, that's your ropes, that's your anchor systems, everything. How often do we have to inspect? Prior to each use. Who are we inspecting it from? Why or how are we inspecting it? We're inspecting it per the manufacturer's specifications. What are we looking for? Mildew, wear, damage, any other deterioration that we see on it. If we find anything defective, we simply give it to the apprentice. Okay, that's always a bad joke that never goes over very well. You find anything defective, you remove it from service immediately and you do not allow it to remain on the job site. The employer must only use PFASs. They had to write this into there. For what? For its intended use. So don't use it to hoist materials. Don't use it for anything that it is not intended for. And then the employer must plan for and provide prompt rescue of employees in the event that you have fallen, or make assure the self-rescue capability of employees. So we'll probably get into that portion of it the next time that we meet together. All right, regardless of height, what do you have to do? You've got to protect these holes. One of the things that they have decided is we must protect regardless of height, any open-sided floors, walkways, platforms, runways above dangerous equipment. We also must guard holes. So this is new down here, number 2, in the big bold wording. This is new. The employer must guard holes into which an employee can trip, step into, or step through by a cupboard of standard strength and construction. These little holes down here, these are plumbing holes, right? Well, they're of various sizes. I've got a small little female foot. This is a 5-inch core hole. Guess what I can step into, trip into, or step through? I can step through one of these things. I can certainly trip into one of these things. So these need to be protected. We need to be guarding these things out. It's not new that we have to protect the holes. It's new how they describe them. We can trip, step into, or step through a hole. Anytime you're working above an impalement hazard, we have to protect the employees regardless of height. They've added a little bit of new wording, verbiage to regardless of height. Regardless of height, the employer must protect employees from falling into or onto impalement hazards. They never really defined it in the old WAC code, so now they're defining it, such as reinforcing steel, exposed steel, or wood. This is fairly new. They've never really defined what the impalement hazards were. Everybody just kind of figured, oh, of course, rebar. But we have to protect our workers, even if I can fall into wood. Now, this would be wood that would be sharp, that would be able to impale me. Training, I said that they made a little bit of a change to the training requirements. We've always had to provide training. That's not new. There's just a new little requirement to maybe how we're retraining people. Provide fall protection training for employees exposed to fall hazards. We need to make sure that these guys are able to recognize the hazards of falling, the procedures of how to protect themselves, how to inspect, all of that good stuff. Make sure when we're training that we're training by a competent person, that's someone who has skills, knowledge, experience. They have the ability to stop work. Your competent person always has stop work authority. You need to train them in what? When fall protection is required, what fall protection is required, how to erect it, maintain it, how to wear it, how to assemble it, what to inspect, what to be looking for. They have to be trained in the use and the operation of the systems you're going to be providing them. They need to know the limitations, the limitations of their systems. They have to understand the proper care. Leaving my lifeline over the rooftop for 4 months in the wintertime is probably not proper care and maintenance. It's certainly not proper storage of that lifeline. What's my useful life? How long can I engage with this harness? I saw a gentleman wearing a harness a couple of weeks ago. It was from 2005. It was 15 years old. All right? Just because it's your favorite harness doesn't mean it still has a useful life on it. Make sure the employee, before they're allowed to perform work in a hazardous situation, can do what? Can demonstrate an understanding of the training, can demonstrate the actual ability to use fall protection correctly. All right? This is one of the new things that they threw in there. Retrain the employees who use fall protection whenever it's necessary. So when is it going to be necessary? Certainly whenever there's a change to the work scope of work. Anytime new hazards come up, we're going to have to address the new hazards. If we decided we were going to be working from a horizontal lifeline, and now we've changed our mind and said now we're going to use the safety monitor system, you would need to be retraining people. Well, look at what it says right here. I love this one. Retrain an employee when the employer has reason to believe the understanding, I love this, the motivation and skills required to use fall protection has not been retained. When I'm not showing you that I have the skills or the motivation to wear my harness correctly, use my equipment properly, guess what? Yeah, absolutely, you should be retraining that person until I can prove that I'm retaining the information you're trying to give me. Of course, we always have to document fall protection, right? So document, document, document. Look at what they say here in documentation though. Make sure you're including the name of the employee, the dates you trained them, the subjects you trained them, and then the name and the signature of the competent person who actually conducted that training. No real big changes to the fall protection work plan. They just changed and clarified the definition of it. So anytime you're above 10 feet, you guys are roofers, anytime you're on a flat pitched roof above 10 feet, you need to make sure that you have a fall protection plan. It's describing your hazards, how you're going to protect, what equipment you're going to use, how you're going to inspect it, how you're going to secure your tools, your storing of your tools, your handling of materials. We're going to use a gin wheel system to hoist things up to us. Describe how you're going to provide overhead protection. We're going to have safety nets, debris nets. We're going to have warning lines down below. We're going to delineate the areas. You know, everybody's going to be wearing tools attached with tool lanyards to their tool belt so we don't drop anything. One of the extremely important ones is F, describe the method for prompt, safe removal of injured workers. You cannot have a 911 as your sole method for recovery. 911's not prompt. They're not on the job site. How are you going to get to these people immediately? We all know we've got about 5 to 7 minutes to rescue a worker who's hanging in a harness. So how are you going to do that on site? Keep your fall protection plans available on the job site. You do not kill these things until you walk away from that job, until you're completely finished with that job. So I'm going to speed up here a little bit. Holes, we need to cover holes, right? Remember, a hole is anything that an employee from falling through, into, or through holes anytime we're 4 feet or more above the ground. The 200 codes are the 4-foot rule. How do we protect? Use a standard guardrail system, put a cover down, use a warning line, wear 15 feet back from all unprotected sides or edges of that hole. Use a PFAS system. Skylights, you guys are up there on the rooftops. So if we're working on roofs and there's skylights or open holes where the skylights are supposed to be, these things need to be protected so we don't fall into them. If the skylight has been installed and is not capable of supporting, this is new right here, strength requirements in big bold letters is new. Without failure, twice the weight, at least twice the weight of the employees, the equipment and materials that may be imposed on the skylight at any one time. If it cannot be capable of supporting that, then we have to do what? We have to cover it out. It needs to be guarded by a cover of standard strength and construction around all open sides. Hatchways and chutes, if you guys are going up there to the rooftop and you're still climbing up through an open hatchway, we need to protect these and make sure that we're not falling through those. We need to use a removable standard guardrail system. We should have toe boards around all open sides. We should have a rail system right here, so when I climb up that ladder, I remove the rail, I step off the ladder. If nobody's coming up behind me, I put that rail system right back on. I want to point out that this ladder does not extend 36 inches, does not extend the appropriate 36 inches. Steep pitched? What's steep pitched? Steep pitched is any surface where I cannot maintain normal footing without the use of some kind of device. Steep pitch is always more than 4 and 12. Greater than 4 and 12 is a steep pitched roof. Above 4 feet, if any worker is exposed to hazards at 4 feet on a steep pitched roof, what do we have to do? Safety monitor cannot be used. Warning line system cannot be used. They need to be in a restraint system or an arrest system or using a positioning device that will stop their fall in just 2 feet. Positioning devices need to be situated so they stop your fall within 2 feet. On low pitched roofs, if we're doing anything other than roofing or leading edge work, if we're on a low pitched roof, less than 4 and 12, above 4 feet, we have to be protected, all right? If you're up there actively roofing, engaged in roof work, and it's over 4 feet, you don't have to protect until it gets to where? The 10-foot rule. And then above 10 feet, you have to protect. You can use a safety watch system when one employee is conducting repair work or servicing equipment on a low-pitched roof, 4 or more. You could use the safety watch. It's a 1-to-1 system. This is what a hazardous slope is. Anybody working more than 4 feet on a hazardous slope, a slope from which construction work is performed where normal footing cannot be maintained without the use of devices due to the pitch, the weather conditions, or the other surface materials. We have to protect these guys at 4 feet. And now we get into that really interesting thing right here called vehicles and rolling stock. Remember, if you go back to the definition of a working walking surface, we stripped out 45 by 45. We stripped it out. And so that opens up everything except for it said other than ladders. Vehicles and rolling stock. The employer must ensure that employees exposed to fall hazards 4 feet or more to the ground or lower level from vehicles or rolling stock, right, on which employees must be located in order to perform their job duties are protected by fall arrest systems. And when it comes to those fall arrest systems, what are we talking about? Seriously, I'm on the back of a truck bed. Well, if it's feasible, we're going to have to protect now above 4 feet. If it's feasible, where suitable anchorages cannot be provided, or when the use of fall protection creates a greater hazard, work may be performed on vehicles or rolling stock without a fall protection system. So this is really where feasibility comes in. It has to be feasible. The only way you can ever get away from conventional fall protection is when you can prove that it's going to create a greater hazard or it's infeasible. I'll tell you right now, there's a bunch of anchor systems that are showing up for rolling stock. So this is the last thing we're going to talk about today, and then we'll open it up for questions. In the 4-foot rule, which is the 200 section, in the 4-foot rule, there's a few little exemptions that do go along with this. Okay, so who's exempt? Employees are exempt from this under the following conditions. Always first man up, last man down. I'm the first one up, installing the fall protection anchor prior to any work taking place, I have an exemption. If I'm the last man down, I'm bringing that anchor off of the rooftop. I'm disassembling the horizontal line. I'm bringing down the warning line system that we've been using because all of the work has been completed. I have an exemption. Second one, you guys, when employees are inspecting, investigating, or assessing roof level conditions or work to be performed only on low-pitch roofs prior to the start of any activity or after all work activity has been completed. If you look down at the bottom, though, it says this exemption, again, this does not apply on steep pitch roofs. If we're on a steep pitch roof, 4 feet, regardless, we have to protect these people. So let's talk about this very briefly. What are examples of activities that the department would consider to fall under number 2? So this is what they determine as activities that are acceptable. You're measuring a roof to determine the amount of materials that you're going to need for your project. You're inspecting the roof for any damage, but you're not removing equipment or components. You're assessing the roof to determine what method of fall protection you're going to provide for your employees. These are your exemption examples. Examples the department will not recognize as inspecting or estimating are going to include delivering, staging, or storing materials on your rooftop, and persons estimating or inspecting on roofs that would be considered the hazardous slope. Okay, so any steep pitch roofs, steep pitch is anything above 4 and 12. You don't get these exemptions. You have to be protected. If you guys are measuring the roof to determine how much materials you need, if you're inspecting it for damage without removing anything, if you're assessing the rooftop to determine what type of protection you're going to provide, you have an exemption from fall protection requirements. Okay, this is exactly where I wanted to end up today. So Tracy, I'm going to turn it back over to you, or you can take control of things. I believe I've stopped showing my screen. Here we go, stop showing screen. Stop showing screen. Tracy, are you out there? There you are.
I'm here. And at this point in time, does anyone have any questions? I don't see anything typed into the question box at this point in time. So I'll give you a second if you have some questions to ask Erin regarding what she just presented or actually anything else safety-wise.
So no questions probably means either I lulled you all into sleep my melodious voice lulled you all into sleep, or I explained everything so brilliantly, we have no questions.
Well, I think you explained everything so brilliantly because I was listening, and it's a lot of information too, just to kind of sort through in your mind and make sure that you get it all straightened out. And, you know, I think for me, I would have to reread all those slides and kind of line it up with my company maybe, and then come up with some questions. So perhaps our second part of this, there'll be a lot more questions, and I would certainly like to get those slides out to everybody who participated today as well.
You bet. I am more than willing to send those your way.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll give you a couple more seconds to type in any questions, and if not, we're going to conclude today's Lunch and Learn, and we will be rejoining Erin on November 10th at 11 a.m. for the second part of the fall protection rules. And please make sure that you sign up if you haven't already for part 2. There'll be a link in our weekly newsletter tomorrow. And also please watch for our quarterly news magazine, which will be coming in the mail in the next few days. So I guess we don't have any questions, so we will conclude. Thank you all for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.